First of all, I'd like to say good morning to you all, and thank you very much for responding to our invitation to hear this presentation this morning from Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. At the very beginning, I'd like to extend a big welcome to you, Mary Helen. We have, the Institute has, over the last 2 years, held a number of these events. The previous two invited guests were both fantastic blokes who are interested in suicide prevention and the treatment of suicidality in particular. We've had a bit of experience of inviting overseas guests, and may I say that no one's said yes as many times as Mary Helen has. She responded very quickly to our invitation. And then I see that since then she's actually accepted a lot of other invitations, and she's packed her time in Australia to the max, I think. So very, very grateful that you are here. I'd like to say just a few words about why we have invited Mary Helen. The Hunter Institute of Mental Health for many years has been engaged with universities in Australia who prepare graduates for a career in teaching. And our purpose in doing that is to ensure that graduating teachers understand that they are going to play a crucial role in building the mental health of the children that they teach, the young people they teach, and also a critical role in creating a school environment where young people can flourish, as well as learn literacy, numeracy, etc. There is a good body of evidence that looking after the whole person, looking after the social and emotional aspects of a young person's life is a very important aspect of both a healthy life and good academic outcomes. So we found that we've been able to get a shared agenda with educators who are interested in ensuring that their teachers are effective teachers and that they are effective at building resilience in young people. We've been doing that for some time now, and we are at the stage where we're looking at renewing what we're doing. And as the work that Mary Helen has been doing is very new and appears to us to be very relevant to our rethinking of our program, this is a brilliant opportunity for us to have Mary Helen here to tell us about her work. The other thing that the Institute's been doing is working in the education of childcare workers, and gradually in Australia we've come to the point of understanding that young people are learning from the beginning of their lives right through. And so what are some of the questions for us are, what are the implications for childcare in the work that's being done by Mary Helen? So it's a privilege to have you here, and I think we're very excited to hear what you're going to present. There will be a break about halfway through for you to stretch your legs, and for Mary Helen to have a break as well. But we are aiming to finish around 12 o'clock. So before we start, and I'd also like to just say to Mary Helen that it's traditional in Australia that we now acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on today was once held in custody by the people of Awabba, the Awabakal people. And this beautiful country around Newcastle is, it's a privilege to live here and to work here. And so let's acknowledge that and acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay our respects to them. So having done that, I'd like to introduce you to Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind invitation. It's really wonderful to be here. It's always a privilege for me to be able to talk with people who actually work with children and who train the people who work with children, because that I really feel is where the impact is going to be on the next generation. So I accepted the invitations because I feel like it's an opportunity to help shape the way that children's lives develop over the next generation, and that is the most important job that we have as a society and as a human race right now. So thank you for the opportunity to do that, and thank you for the good work that you do in this area. So over the course of the morning, what I thought I would share with you, but we can sort of switch it up if you're interested in other things, but what I thought I would share with you is some of the science that I'm doing and my team is doing back at the University of Southern California, where I study the neurobiology of social emotion. So I study the emotions that we have about other people and the ways that those emotions actually shape and change the way we feel about ourselves. So really, in studying emotions about other people, we're actually studying through a backdoor the way people have emotions about themselves and the way that those emotions potentially shape the decisions they make, the behaviors they engage in, the people they admire, the way they help other people, and things like that that are very important for making a world go around in a morally and socially responsible way where we would actually want to live. And so I'm going to talk to you some about the science as a way to kind of, stretch your mind a bit. Think about something that probably you don't usually think about. This is really cutting edge stuff, so a lot of the stuff I'm going to present hasn't even been published yet. It's in the process of being written right now. And then we'll also, toward the second half of the talk, start to segue back into child development. And we'll try to take some of the general principles that I'm learning from the work on the neurobiology of emotion, things like cultural differences and individual differences and the ways that the self and the sense of self is sort of constructed in the brain, so that kind of, intangible, subjective sense that I can't prove it, but I sure feel like I'm real, and if you pinched me, it would hurt, and if you, hated my talk, it would also hurt, right? Where do we get that from biologically, and what are the sort of constraints on the biological system that allows us to have that subjective sense of self, that sort of is the system that supports us biologically in having an awareness of our own mind, which is, in effect, the basic piece that you're looking for when you're looking at mental health. It's a critical piece of being a human, and without it, people don't live. It's one of the main causes of suicide, actually, that people sort of lose this sense. They lose that realness to themselves. And so we want to understand what that is. And so I've titled the talk, let me tell you one other thing, and that is that a lot of this stuff is going to be, sort of moving between disciplines. I'm interdisciplinarily trained. My doctorate is in human development and psychology in a school of education, but then my postdoctoral training is in affective neuroscience, and now I have 3 appointments in neuroscience, education, and psychology to be able to do this work. So I'm moving in and out of different disciplinary frameworks, and so you won't be familiar with all of them, and sometimes I'll use words and things that you've never heard of, and that's not anything to be embarrassed about. Just please ask me, okay? And then also we can have a conversation as we go about what this stuff means for the work that you do. I don't mind at all being interrupted as we go. This is really meant to be kind of a working session. I know I look like a talking head, but we can work together on what this stuff means, because I don't know what it means for you. I can give you some basic information, but then you need to construct, well, what does this mean for us in the work that we do? How could we use this? And I'm willing to think with you about that construction process and help you with that. But I can't do it for you because I don't know your kids and I don't know your students like you do. You're the experts there. Okay, so that said, I titled the talk Embodied Brains, Social Minds. And I did that really as a way to frame the ideas that I'm about to present to you scientifically, which is that the brain that we have, we often think of kids as coming to a classroom, right, with a biology. They come there with a genetic code that makes such and such a kind of brain, and that's who we've got in seat number 4 over here on the left. And then we're going to expose that kid to lots of experiences that will shape them and help them to work with that. But that's really, really not the way that biology works, we're finding. Instead, what we're finding, us and many groups really across social neuroscience, is that the biology that you have is a set of kind of propensities. It's a set of sort of constraints and logics to the way that your body develops and your brain develops and your mind develops. But your social use of that biology, the way that your self, in the literal sense, is embedded in a cultural and social and family context, thinking sort of in Bronfenbrenner's kind of framework, the way that you embed that biology in the real social world in which we live is shaping the very way that the biology develops. So your biology and your social world are co-organizing one another. That's how I like to think about it. The two things are completely interdependent on one another. And we often think about biology as kind of unfolding naturally. It just kind of goes along and does its thing, and then your social world comes and sort of pokes at that. But what I'm going to show you over the course of the morning, I hope, is that that's not the way to think about it anymore. And there are really some very poignant, heartbreaking examples of how true and literal this actually is. So, for example, the work by Chuck Nelson and Nathan Fox and their colleagues, funded by the MacArthur Foundation, where they did a big, randomly assigned controlled trial study of institutionally raised Romanian children. And basically what they did, it's quite heartbreaking, but what they did was, they found as many foster families as they could for institutionally raised children there, infants, and they trained those families, but then the rest of the kids were institutionalized, who came to the institution. Some went to foster families, some stayed in the institution. They basically picked their names out of hats, and raised as many as they could in the families, and the rest were in the institution, and they watched what happened. And the MacArthur Foundation was subsidizing the food in the institution and the staff and the quality of the care center that the kids were in, so they were equivalent between the institution and the families. So in other words, the kids in the institution had all of their biological needs met in the traditional sense. They were fed well, they had clean beds to sleep in, they had playrooms to play in, and toys to play with. But what they didn't have is high quality, dependable, reliable, systematic care from adults who love them, basically. They did not have intense and reliable social relationships with consistent caregivers. They had a rotating staff of caregivers who change every 8 hours and who take care of them in groups. And what happens? They follow the children over their entire childhood. And you don't just get in the institution kids who are kind of socially inept and emotionally dysregulated and cognitively delayed. You get 17-year-old kids who are 3 feet tall. People do not grow, literally. Their biology does not progress the way it should in the absence of adequate social stimulation. The very nature of our species now is a social one. Our biology is a social one. And so our social environment as children is incredibly critical to organizing the adults that we become, both our biology and our mental selves. Okay? And so I titled the talk Embodied Brains, Social Minds for that reason, that I'm going to show you over the course of the next 45 minutes or so that it turns out that the very same platforms neurobiologically that are responsible for maintaining our basic homeostatic regulation, that means the survival of our organism. They make your heart beat, they make you breathe when you're asleep, they make your blood pressure stay within legal limits, they make you awake when you should be awake and comatose when you should be comatose. These very, very basic systems whose job it is to regulate your biology and keep you alive are the same systems that are recruited and activated when you, for example, admire the inspirational achievements of another person, when you appreciate their virtue, when you feel compassion for someone who is in mental or social circumstances that are painful for them. And what this tells us is that as humans, it's as if our social survival and our biological survival have grown together over evolution, so that they're totally now integrated with one another. They're completely intertwined with one another and codependent on one another. And the reason that we feel our social relationships so poignantly
is literally, we think, because the feeling of those relationships plays itself out. It hooks itself into the same biological machinery whose original purpose and continued purpose is to manage the organism of your body, to keep you literally alive. So our social lives and our biological lives have merged. And that speaks very poignantly, for example, to the work that you do, because it helps us to understand how much our social interactions and relationships and experiences and cognitive experiences are organizing the person we become. Okay. So, other questions so far? It's kind of a heavy morning topic, but yes, please. I'm sorry?
Are you too cold?
Oh, no, I'm fine. Thank you. Very empathic of you to ask, though. My biology is doing just fine. And so now my mind can go. Okay, no, thank you, I'm fine. Okay. So I'm going to start the talk with this painting. It's kind of a bad reproduction of it, I'm sorry. When its vibrancy gets lost when it's projected. But nonetheless, I'm going to start. It's a painting done by a friend of mine, Margaret Lazari, who is the chair of the Fine Arts Department at University of Southern California. And I love this painting as a starting point for working with educators across all levels and clinicians on the biology of sociality and emotion. And here's why. I think it visually depicts so nicely exactly what I've been talking about. If you sort of squint at this seascape, okay, you can see these white wrinkles around the middle. Those are actually the connectivity data from one person, one brave volunteer's brain in my lab. So what Margaret's done is we gave her data from the brain of a person who volunteered to go in our scanner and have pictures taken of their brain. And basically what we did is, if you know about the brain at all, there's a kind of cortex around the outside. There's the thin little ribbon of cells, little sheet of cells around the outside, the neurons, who we think are doing the active thinking, or some of it. There's all kinds of cells that are actually supporting them, but okay. But those little neurons really are only able to create the whole experience of a person, the mind you have, the emergent property of a mind, by connecting with one another in amazingly complex, mind-bogglingly complex networks of little tails that can go across and talk in organized ways across the whole brain. This is why, by the way, things like right brain and left brain learners and all that stuff is a bunch of baloney, okay? Sorry to burst your bubble if any of you believe that stuff, but that's junk, okay? And I'm gonna show you why. But the brain is massively interconnected. There's something like 1 billion connections in a cubic centimeter of brain tissue, and think how many cubic centimeters you've gotten there. To make simple dichotomies like hemispheres and stuff like that, yeah, it gets us some buying power in neuroscience, but it gets you no buying power in education, okay? And we can talk about that toward the end. But so what we've got here is basically the sum total of the connections, the networked connections across one person's brain. It's the sum total of how her biology and her experiences have organized all that crosstalk into comprehensive networks that allow her to engage in the world with skills that are situated in the context and the time and the needs that she has and the talents that she has. And Margaret has taken that connectivity of one person's brain and she's painted it into this sea of life, right? This person is not a brain in a bucket or a kid in a chair with a brain and the body gets kind of cut off from the neck. We don't worry about this part down, right? We just think about the stuff up here in education so much. But what she's done is taken that brain and situated it in this world of life. So it's now no longer sort of separate and isolated in the corner. This brain is being bolstered up, literally. It's being floated and sloshed back and forth by the currents of the social and biological world in which it lives, by the little fish swimming around representing the spontaneity of ideas, and by the sun shining down through it and warming it, and the weeds growing up underneath it, and the currents sort of holding it and sloshing it around, like I said. And so that's how I like to think about the brain, not as a kind of, separate thing from us, but as an embodied organ that works to keep us alive and functioning, and that together creates the emergence of the experience of us. So, I'm going to start with a warning. This is a very dark and scary kind of topic. People get worried. People were very worried yesterday at the Mind and Potential Conference, some of them, because I had the nerve to suggest that your brain and your mind actually have something to do with each other. But this is a picture of my daughter's jack-o'-lantern from a couple years ago. You know, in the US, we celebrate Halloween, and we carve out pumpkins with faces, and we put candles inside them. And the reason that I'm showing you this is because I think, again, it's a nice depiction of what I do as a neuroscientist and what you do every day as a person and as an educator especially. When you look at this jack-o'-lantern in the darkness, you can't see the candle on the inside that's shining out. You can't see the warmth and the heat and the light that make that thing come alive. But you imagine what's going on inside there and the state of that candle based on the feeling it gives you when you watch, based on the knowledge you have about, candles and physiology. So if we segue into humans now, I can't see inside my experiment participants' brains. I can't see inside your minds right now. You can't see inside mine. But if we want to learn from something from one another and connect to each other, we use our own experiences as a kind of a platform for vicariously conjuring and experiencing what we imagine might be the physiological state of another human being. As I even look across you right now, I look at your facial expressions, I look at your postures, I look at the nods and the behaviors you're doing, and I ask myself, not consciously, right, but are these people following me? Are they engaged? Should I slow down? Should I speed up? How are people reacting? And you're doing the same thing with me. You're watching me and trying to imagine and build for yourself inside your own mind the information that I'm trying to share from mine. It's a kind of a cognitive empathy that we have going on here, where I'm building a picture for you, and you are trying, based on what I'm telling you, to rebuild it inside your own mind, and to share my mind with you, and me to share yours, and to use that as a starting point for establishing a rapport that allows us to learn from one another. And that right there is the essence of education. That is what educators are meant to do. The job of an educator is to be very, very skilled at empathizing with their learners for whom they're responsible. Cognitively empathizing, imagining and understanding what is the mental state of that person right now, and affectively too, at the same time, what does it feel like to be that person and to have that mental state right now? And then starting from there, saying, okay, I'm the more skilled learner here. I will show you, learner, another possibility space. Come with me in my mind and let me share with you what it feels like to be a mathematician. Let me share with you what it feels like to think like a historian, or to be a good friend, or to have a confident opinion of yourself. You model that empathically, and you start where they are, and you build it skillfully in front of them, and share with them that goal so that they can share your mind with you. That is what education is about. And so I'm going to talk about that process neurobiologically now, so we get a sense. But the other reason that I put up this scary warning, right, is that, as a biologist, I have several hats that I wear, right? I'm a teacher trainer, and I'm also I train students who become teachers, and then I also, train psychologists, and I also train neuroscientists, and I do neuroscience research. And what I didn't appreciate when I began to study the neurobiology of social emotions, again, those emotions we have about other people, right? Emotions like I'm particularly interested in admiration and elevation and awe and inspiration. And neuroscientists ask me, why do you study that? Well, because I think it's actually really, really important for educators, right? What is the most important, arguably the most important emotion that you could have in your learners as they go out into the world as your graduates? That sense of inspired purposefulness, that sense of what we call intrinsic motivation to do good things with my life, to do useful things with my life. I can't tell you what those things are going to be, kid. You have your own set of talents and skills, and frankly, you're going to be living in a world that I can't even imagine in terms of the technological change, in terms of the globalization, in terms of the cultural mixing that's going to happen. You're going somewhere that we haven't seen. But what I can do for you is endow you or allow you to build for yourself, orchestrate a set of experiences for you that allow you to build for yourself that sense of purposeful, directed, meaningful self that allows you to imagine a future that's useful and to go there and to have the skills to make it happen. So the academic skills and the social and emotional purposefulness are intertwined with one another. That's what you want. A kid who can do all the tests but who doesn't use it for anything in the world, who cares, right? And a kid who's so nice and gung-ho and wants to do great stuff but doesn't have the stick-to-itiveness and does not have the skills to make it happen. I mean, if you've got a bridge in front of you that's falling down and you're not an engineer, you're in big doo-doo, right? You need to have both, but those two things are intertwined with one another from the start. And what I didn't realize, back to the scary part, what I didn't realize when I began to study the neurobiology of social emotion is that as I'm studying how people build states of inspiration and awe, for example, or compassion, for another example, what I'm really studying is not just their emotions about other people, but their own feeling of self, that kind of intangible sense that I'm a real person and that I'm here for a reason. I want to do something with my life. I want to give something, I want to be loved, and I want to love others, right? That kind of sense of self, that subjective awareness or feeling of yourself. And so it's kind of scary to realize that, because it can look like, as a neuroscientist, I'm trying to reduce the essence of you, to a set of orange spots on an MRI scan. But nothing could be further from the truth for several reasons. I mean, I kind of wish I could do that, honestly, but that's completely impossible technologically. And I'm only being tongue-in-cheek, I really actually don't want to do that. What we're testing is not you, what makes you you. It's basic hypotheses about the underlying systems that support that sense. And in doing that, in understanding something about the nature of those systems, it helps us to sort of constrain and understand better the essence of that sense of self, so that we can shape it and promote it and support it in children's development. Does that make sense? So I'm not trying to reduce the essence of being a human to a set of neural activation patterns. What I'm trying to do is use those neural activation patterns as a source of information that I can interpret to be able to learn about the nature of the human condition, what it means to be a person, and how we can best support that. Clear? Good? Okay. Any questions? Okay. And I just want to point out again that even though, because of the technological limitations of studying the brain, I have to study individual people laying on their back in a little hollow tube with their arms by their sides in the noise with the headphones on in the dark, and please don't move and try not to, shift your weight at all over the next hour. And now, can you please be inspired, right? What we're really studying is how we're so many jack-o'-lanterns in the darkness. We're all constantly, actively trying to empathize and understand the minds around us, to learn from each other, and to relate to each other with all that entails. So I'm studying individuals But what's important is to maintain the understanding that what we're actually studying is individuals who are within a social and cultural framework always. I mean, Vygotsky really had this right when he discussed how we become what he called human from animal, okay, by internalizing the tools of our culture, the ways of thinking that the more developed humans around us have for making sense of and understanding the world. And as we internalize those mental tools, we learn to think like the people around us. And it's that process that makes us human, he says. And so we're always studying that, even though we can only look at it in one person at a time. Okay? So I'm just going to start by telling you a story. It's a story about this woman in the blue dress. She's a real person in Sudan. I actually know her. And if you can see what she's doing, she's holding up a book that has pictures of sort of diagrams of a pregnant woman. And she's teaching these other women here in a very rural part of Sudan about pregnancy. And her story is that this woman grew up in a part of Sudan